Nestled in the Hollywood Hills, Hedy Lamarr's former home has become the subject of whispered conversations and speculative intrigue since her passing in 2000. Known for her groundbreaking contributions to science and her spellbinding performances on screen, Lamarr's aura seems to have lingered, infusing the house with an inexplicable energy. The house, a mid-century modern masterpiece, exudes a kind of timeless elegance, much like Lamarr herself. However, visitors and new owners alike have reported a series of chilling experiences that defy explanation. One account comes from a couple who purchased the house in 2003. From their first night, they felt an uncanny presence. The wife, a skeptic, dismissed it as nerves, but the husband, a self-proclaimed sensitive, claimed to hear faint humming in the evenings. At first, they chalked it up to ambient noise from the hills until the melody became unmistakably clear. It was a song, the husband recalled in an interview with a local historian. Something classical, haunting, and beautiful. I later found out it was from one of her films. The incidents escalated. Lights flickered unpredictably, objects shifted positions overnight, and on more than one occasion, a faint scent of Lamarr's signature perfume rose and amber wafted through the air without explanation. The most unnerving experience occurred during a house party. A guest, exploring the home's vintage library, swore she saw a woman in a shimmering gown standing by the window. She assumed it was another guest until the figure vanished. She described the woman as breathtakingly beautiful, with dark hair and piercing eyes, a description that matched Hedy Lamarr. A paranormal investigator invited to the home in 2010 claimed to capture EVP recordings of a voice whispering in a distinct European accent. The recordings, analyzed by audio experts, yielded no definitive proof but left many listeners unsettled. Neighbors, too, have their stories. One longtime resident said he often spotted a silhouette pacing by the window late at night, even during the years when the house stood vacant. It looked like she was deep in thought, he said, almost as if she was working on something. Theories abound about why Lamarr's spirit might linger. Some believe she is attached to the house because it was where she conducted much of her inventive work, including the early designs for frequency-hopping technology. Others speculate that her restless presence is tied to the loneliness she experienced later in life. To this day, the house remains occupied, though the current owners rarely entertain questions about their experiences. They've renovated portions of the home but left Lamarr's old study untouched. Out of respect, they say, though rumors suggest they've experienced enough to prefer not to disturb whatever remains. Visitors who approach the house often leave flowers at the gate, a tribute to the enigmatic star. Some swear they've heard faint laughter or the soft strains of classical music drifting through the air, a ghostly reminder of Hedy Lamarr's brilliance and beauty that refuses to fade. The current owners, the Richards family, rarely spoke about the oddities in their home, but small details slipped out during casual conversations with friends. Their teenage daughter, Lily, confided in a classmate that she often heard the sound of a typewriter clicking away at night. The odd part, the Richards didn't own a typewriter. One evening, Lily decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight and a phone for recording, she followed the faint noise to her mother's study. The room was dark, the air thick with an almost electric tension. The sound stopped the moment she stepped inside. Lily scanned the room, the beam of her flashlight dancing across old bookshelves and the heavy oak desk. That's when she noticed it. A thin layer of dust disturbed on the desk, as if someone had dragged their fingers across it. But there were no footprints leading to or from the desk. A week later, Mrs. Richards experienced something stranger still. She was sorting through boxes in the attic when she came across a small, locked chest. It was old and unmarked, the wood warped with age. Intrigued, she carried it downstairs. Her husband, David, tried forcing it open with a screwdriver, but gave up when the lock refused to budge. Later that night, they left the chest on the dining table, intending to call an antique specialist. When they woke the next morning, the chest was gone. No one in the family admitted to moving it, and a search of the house yielded nothing. Strangely, a faint outline of where the chest had been remained on the table, as though something impossibly heavy had sat there for decades. The incident unnerved them, but they decided not to dwell on it. After all, how does one explain the unexplainable? The chest wasn't seen again until a few months later, when Lily was scrolling through old photos of the house she had found in an online archive. One black-and-white image, dated 1947, showed a party in what appeared to be the very same dining room. Guests in glamorous attire smiled for the camera, and in the corner of the table, unmistakable, sat the chest. When she showed the photo to her parents, Mrs. Richards turned pale. "That's not possible," she murmured, staring at the image. "I saw that chest yesterday. Couldn't have been here in the 40s. More peculiar still, as Lily zoomed in on the photograph, she noticed a figure standing in the doorway of the dining room, a dark-haired woman watching the scene. Her expression was unreadable, her presence almost unnoticed by the partygoers. But Lily recognized her immediately. It was Hedy Lamarr. That night, the Richards decided to contact a renowned paranormal investigator. The investigator, Daniel Clark, arrived with a small team, equipped with infrared cameras, EMF detectors, and audio recorders. As they set up their equipment, he questioned the family about their experiences. When Mrs. Richards mentioned the missing chest, Clark seemed intrigued. "That's not the first time I've heard of an object like that disappearing in this house," he said. "Years ago, a neighbor mentioned something similar, a small box that vanished and reappeared under mysterious circumstances. It's as if the house is keeping secrets." What happened next startled everyone. As the team reviewed footage from their cameras, one of them gasped. On the screen, in the dim glow of the dining room, a faint figure could be seen standing by the table. She was partially transparent, her features blurred but unmistakable, a vision of timeless beauty, watching them from another era. The investigator paused the video and looked at the family. "I think we're dealing with more than just residual energy here," he said. "She's aware of us. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story." The air in the house grew heavier as the investigation continued, a subtle shift that everyone noticed but couldn't quite articulate. Clark's team, normally composed and professional, became increasingly unsettled. One of the technicians, a young man named Ethan, started complaining of a sharp, metallic ringing in his ears. Moments later, his EMF detector began to spike erratically. "Something's here," Clark said, his voice low. "Stay calm, but be ready." In the library, one of the motion-activated cameras triggered, capturing footage of a book falling from the shelf without explanation. The book was an old engineering manual, its cover faded but legible. What caught everyone's attention, though, was the handwritten note tucked inside. "They'll never understand us, but maybe they will someday." The handwriting was elegant, looping, and undeniably feminine. Lily, who had been observing the proceedings from the corner of the room, felt a chill run down her spine. She pointed at the note. "That looks like her handwriting," she whispered. "How would you know?" her father asked, but his voice wavered, betraying his unease. Lily hesitated. "I found an old letter online, written by her in the 1950s. It's exactly the same." As Clark examined the book, the sound of faint humming filled the air again, this time clearer and closer than ever. The melody was hauntingly familiar to Mrs. Richards, though she couldn't place where she had heard it before. It seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere, wrapping around them like an invisible thread. "Do you hear that?" Clark asked, his voice tight. Before anyone could answer, one of the cameras in the dining room toppled over with a loud crash. The team rushed to the scene, only to find the chest, the same chest that had vanished weeks ago, sitting in the middle of the floor. It was open. Inside were papers, yellowed with age, covered in diagrams and equations. Clark carefully lifted one out, holding it up to the dim light. "These look like patent schematics," he murmured. "But not for anything I recognize." Mrs. Richards, standing behind him, gasped. "That's her invention," she said. "Frequency hopping technology." Lily's voice cut through the room, trembling but firm. "She's trying to tell us something." At that moment, the lights flickered, plunging the house into brief darkness. When they came back on, the chest was closed again, but this time, the lock had vanished entirely, leaving no trace it had ever been there. Clark's team decided to stay overnight, determined to document further activity. As the hours passed, the house seemed to settle into an uneasy stillness. But around 3 a.m., Clark woke to a peculiar sound, a rhythmic tapping, like fingers against glass. He followed it to the study, where he found Lily staring out the window, her face pale. "What are you doing here?" he asked, but she didn't respond. Clark stepped closer, following her gaze to the garden below. There, in the moonlight, stood a woman in a flowing gown, her back turned to the house. She seemed to be looking at something just out of sight, her figure both solid and ethereal. Clark reached for his camera, but the moment he raised it, the figure turned her head ever so slightly, as if she were aware of him watching. Though he couldn't see her face clearly, he was struck by the impression of profound sadness and something else. A warning. As the first rays of dawn broke over the hills, the woman disappeared into the shadows, leaving Clark and Lily staring at the empty garden. Neither spoke, but the unspoken question lingered between them. Was she protecting them, or keeping them away from something far darker? The next morning, Clark's team reviewed the footage captured overnight. Most of it seemed inconclusive: faint shadows, subtle sounds, and the strange humming that now felt almost familiar. But one clip, taken in the study, froze everyone in their tracks. The camera had been left running near the desk where the typewriter noises were frequently heard. At precisely 3:12 a.m., the empty room flickered on screen, bathed in pale moonlight. Then, in a single frame, the silhouette of a woman appeared, seated at the desk. Her hands moved in swift, precise motions, as if typing on an invisible machine. Her face was obscured, but her form was unmistakable. It was Hedy Lamarr. When Clark paused the footage, Lily leaned in closer, her brow furrowing. "Wait," she said, pointing to the screen. "Look at her hands." Zooming in, they saw what Lily had noticed. Her fingers weren't just hovering over the desk, they seemed to be manipulating something. A faint, translucent outline of a typewriter shimmered into view, flickering like an image caught between two worlds. Just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished again, along with the figure. "What is she trying to write?" Clark murmured, his voice barely audible. No one had an answer, but the weight of the question pressed heavily on them all. Later that day, Clark contacted a historian who specialized in Lamarr's life and work. Dr. Evelyn Foster arrived at the house with an archive of Hedy's letters, patents, and personal journals. As she spread the documents across the dining table, her expression grew increasingly grave. "These schematics," she said, gesturing to the papers from the chest, "aren't just designs for frequency hopping. There's something else, something far more advanced. It looks like an early blueprint for quantum encryption." Mrs. Richards looked puzzled. Quantum encryption? Was that even possible back then? Dr. Foster hesitated. Not with the technology available at the time. But if anyone could have conceived it, it would have been her. The question is, why would she hide this? And why is it reappearing now? Before anyone could speculate further, the sound of the typewriter began again, this time louder and unmistakable. It echoed from the study, relentless and urgent. The group hesitated before heading toward the sound, their collective anxiety palpable. When they entered the study, the room was empty except for the faint impression of keys being struck on the desk, as if an invisible force was at work. Dr. Foster, braver than most, approached and placed her hand where the phantom typewriter seemed to be. She gasped and yanked her hand back, her fingers red as if she'd touched something burning hot. "What happened?" Clark asked, rushing to her side. "She's trying to tell us something," Dr. Foster said, her voice shaking. "It's not just about her work. There's something hidden here. Something she didn't want anyone to find." That night, Lily had a vivid dream, or so she thought. She stood in the garden, the moon casting long shadows across the lawn. Hedy was there, her face finally visible. Her beauty was haunting, her expression both desperate and determined. "Don't let them have it," Hedy said, her voice echoing as if carried on the wind. "They'll destroy everything." Lily woke with a start, her heart racing. When she glanced at her bedside table, she froze. Sitting there, inexplicably, was the chest open once more. This time, it contained a single object. A key, small and ornate, its handle shaped like an intricate lattice of gears. She didn't dare touch it. By morning, the chest and the key were gone. But Lily's dream lingered, as did the warning. Who was them? And what did Hedy mean by everything? The Richards family was beginning to realize that the house held secrets far beyond the ghost of a Hollywood star. It was a gateway to something much larger and much darker than they could have imagined. Clark, determined to uncover the truth, decided they needed to investigate deeper. "This isn't just about a haunting," he said. "This is about uncovering what she died protecting. But if she's warning us, we need to be very careful." As they prepared to dig further, a knock echoed at the front door. Standing outside was an older man in a tailored suit, holding a briefcase. His demeanor was calm, but his eyes were piercing. "I believe you found something that doesn't belong to you," he said, his voice low and measured. "May I come in?" The man's presence was unsettling, as though the air around him had thickened. Clark stepped forward, his instincts on high alert. "Who are you?" he demanded, though his voice was calm. The man gave a slight, cryptic smile, his eyes never leaving Clark's. "I'm someone who's been searching for a very long time. My name is Thomas Rook, and I represent an organization with a vested interest in certain technological developments." Clark felt a chill, sensing that the conversation was taking a darker turn. "What does that have to do with Hedy Lamarr?" he asked, his voice steady but with a hint of suspicion. Rook's smile faded, and his gaze shifted toward the house. She was more than an actress, more than an inventor. Lamarr was on the verge of discovering something that could change the world, something that could control every form of communication. But it wasn't just her work with frequency hopping. It was something else entirely, something hidden. Clark glanced at the Richards family, then back at Rook. "And you're here to take it from us?" Rook nodded slowly, his expression becoming serious. "You've uncovered a piece of the puzzle, but you have no idea what it really means. She didn't just hide the key to that technology, she hid it from them." Lily, who had been silent until now, spoke up, her voice trembling but curious. "Who are they?" Rook's lips curled into a tight smile. "The same people who've been hunting this for decades. They were after Lamarr long before her death. They've had agents watching this house, waiting for the right moment to claim what's theirs, before anyone could respond." Rook stepped forward, a hand outstretched. "The chest, the key, it's all connected. Lamarr knew that if she died with the secret, it would be lost to history. But she didn't just leave it to chance. She left you the pieces because she knew someone would come looking. Someone with the courage to see it through." Clark moved to intercept him. "And if we refuse to give it to you?" Rook's eyes darkened, his demeanor suddenly more menacing. "Then you'll never leave this house with your lives intact." The tension in the room was palpable. Lily's eyes flitted nervously to the staircase, where the strange, ghostly humming seemed to rise again, louder this time, almost a warning. Without saying a word, Rook opened his briefcase, revealing a small, intricately designed device. "This is a scanner. It can unlock the final piece of the puzzle. Lamarr's legacy is contained in this house, but not in any way you can see. She hid it in the walls." Clark, his heart pounding, glanced at the Richards family. They had no choice but to play along, at least for now. "What are you planning to do with it once you have it?" Rook's gaze hardened. "That's not your concern. What's important is that you give me the key." Lily felt a strange pull toward the device, an almost magnetic attraction to its glimmering surface. She glanced at her parents and then at Clark. "Maybe we should listen to him." Clark shook his head, confused. "Why would you say that?" Lily didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the key, the same key that had mysteriously appeared the night before. It was heavier now, the gears shifting ever so slightly in her hand, as though it were alive. She walked toward Rook, the key trembling between her fingers. I think I know what Hedy wants us to do," she whispered. Without another word, she handed the key to Rook. For a moment, the air in the room seemed to freeze. The humming grew louder, echoing from the walls, as though Lamarr herself were watching from beyond. Rook's expression shifted from one of confidence to something darker, more hungry. He inserted the key into a small, hidden compartment beneath the floorboards of the study. The moment it clicked into place, a low rumble echoed through the house. The walls groaned, and the floor beneath them shifted as if the house itself were coming alive. A hidden compartment opened before them, revealing an ancient-looking metal box covered in intricate symbols. The box was glowing faintly, its energy palpable. Rook's eyes gleamed with triumph as he reached for the box, but just before he could grasp it, the humming reached a deafening pitch, the entire house trembling violently. Lily, her face pale, stepped back. I don't think this is what she wanted. Hedy knew the power in that box. It's too dangerous. Rook turned toward her, eyes narrowed. You have no idea what you've just unleashed. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to twist and distort. A faint silhouette, glowing faintly, appeared once more by the window, the unmistakable figure of Hedy Lamarr. She looked directly at Rook, her expression a mixture of determination and sorrow. You shouldn't have come, she whispered, her voice echoing through the room. Rook froze. For a brief moment, he seemed to hesitate, as if torn between his desire for the box and the overwhelming force of Lamarr's presence. But then, with a final, desperate motion, he lunged for the box. As soon as his fingers brushed the metal, the entire house shook violently. The walls cracked, the floor split, and an intense light erupted from the box, engulfing everything in its wake. In the final moments before everything went dark, Lily heard Hedy's voice one last time. Protect it if you can. And then silence. When the house finally settled, the Richards family and Clark were left standing amid the rubble. The room was empty. The box, the key, and Rook had vanished, leaving only the faintest trace of something that felt like a warning, forever etched into the very walls. It was as if the house had claimed everything for itself, the legacy of Hedy Lamarr sealed away once more. But for how long? And what would become of those who dared to seek the truth? The answers, like the house itself, remained a mystery, one that no one would soon forget. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.